Commander SciFi stood before the massive view screen in his command center and watched the stars shimmer through the crystal walls of Kepler Station. His forearms moved with practiced grace as he reviewed the emergency reports flooding his terminal. The Korthak swarm had finally made their move, and every prediction the Coalition scientists had made was proving correct. The savage alien fleet was tearing through the outer rim colonies like hungry beasts through paper. The crystalline commander's skin flickered with pale blue light as stress hormones coursed through his body. 3 Coalition fleets had already fallen to the Korthak advance, and now only his forces stood between the swarm and the core worlds. But his ships were spread too thin across a dozen systems, and reinforcements were still weeks away. That was when the message arrived from Coalition. High Command. They were sending additional support from the newest member species, humans. SciFi had read their files when they first joined the galactic community 6 months ago. Their technology was at least 200 years behind Coalition standards. Their ships were slow and clunky compared to the elegant vessels of advanced civilizations. Their weapons were primitive kinetic devices that threw chunks of metal instead of refined energy beams. But they had numbers, and right now, numbers were what the Coalition desperately needed. Any warm body that could point a weapon at the enemy was welcome. The human fleet arrived 3 days later, and SciFi watched them drop out of hyperspace with growing disappointment. 12 vessels that looked more like industrial cargo haulers than proper warships. Their hulls were thick and blocky, without any of the graceful curves that marked true military engineering. Dark gray metal plating covered every surface, and crude weapon turrets jutted out at random angles. The lead ship sent a communication request, and SciFi accepted it with resigned patience. The human who appeared on his screen was tall and broad, with short brown hair and calm green eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decorations and spoke in the rough manner typical of his species. Coalition Command, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Defiance. Our fleet is ready for orders. SciFi studied the human captain and noted the relaxed confidence in his voice. Either this Morrison was very brave or very stupid. Captain. Morrison, I am Commander SciFi of the Coalition Defense Force. Your timing is fortunate. The Korthak swarm will reach this system within hours. Morrison nodded and glanced at something off-screen. Understood, Commander. What's our mission? The alien commander pulled up a tactical display showing the positions of all Coalition forces. The enemy fleet is massive and highly aggressive. Our primary objective is to protect the civilian evacuation ships, while our main battle group engages the Korthak vessels. Your fleet will escort the transport convoy to the jump point. There was a brief pause before Morrison responded. Sir, with respect, wouldn't we be more useful in the main fight? My ships pack a decent punch. SciFi's skin flickered with mild annoyance. These humans had no understanding of what they faced. The Korthak were unlike any enemy the galaxy had seen before. Their bioships could adapt to energy weapons in real time, and their swarm tactics overwhelmed even the most advanced defensive systems. Sending primitive human vessels into that meat grinder would be pure waste. Captain Morrison, the Korthak are extremely dangerous opponents. Your ships lack the defensive systems needed to survive direct engagement. The evacuation convoy is a vital mission that requires capable escorts. Morrison seemed about to argue, but then nodded slowly. Understood, Commander. We'll keep the civilians safe. The communication ended, and SciFi turned his attention back to the tactical preparations. His own ships were marvels of Coalition engineering, with adaptive shields that could deflect almost any energy weapon. Their crews were trained in the finest military academies, and their battle doctrine had been refined over centuries of civilized warfare. If anyone could stop the Korthak advance, it would be them. He assigned the human ships to the rear of the formation, where they would be safely out of the way when the real fighting started. The evacuation transports were slow-moving targets, but the journey to the jump point should be routine once his forces engaged the main enemy fleet. As he made final preparations, SciFi found himself wondering about these humans and their strange confidence. Their military records showed a species that had spent most of its existence fighting wars on their home planet. Constant conflicts that seemed to serve no purpose except to determine which group of humans got to control which patch of dirt. It was primitive behavior that most species outgrew when they developed space travel. Perhaps that experience would serve them well as convoy escorts. Simple patrol duty required patience and discipline rather than advanced tactics. The humans could handle watching over a group of slow-moving civilian ships, while the real warriors dealt with the actual threat. The sensors began detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system, and SciFi felt his stress hormones spike again. The Korthak swarm was arriving, and soon they would discover what these savage aliens were truly capable of. He hoped the Coalition fleet would be enough to stop them, because if they failed here, then nothing stood between the swarm and the heart of galactic civilization. The hyperspace rifts opened like wounds in reality, and the Korthak swarm poured through in a tide of organic horror. SciFi watched the sensor readings with growing dread as hundreds of bioships emerged from the void. Each vessel was a living creature the size of a battleship with pulsing flesh hulls and weapon ports that looked like gaping mouths filled with teeth. The largest of the creatures was easily twice the size of any Coalition dreadnought with thick tentacles that writhed through space like massive serpents. Smaller ships swarmed around it like parasites feeding off a host body. The entire fleet moved with the coordination of a single organism rather than individual vessels following battle plans. SciFi had studied the intelligence reports, but seeing the enemy in person was far more disturbing than reading tactical assessments. These were not ships in any traditional sense, but rather spaceborne predators that had evolved to hunt and consume other vessels. Their bioarmor could adapt to different weapon types within minutes, and their organic weapons fired streams of acid that dissolved Coalition shields like water. "All ships, form attack pattern Delta and prepare to engage," SciFi commanded, through the fleet communication system. His vessels moved into their assigned positions with mechanical precision. Each ship knew its role, and the entire formation resembled a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. The Coalition fleet opened, fire first with brilliant beams of coherent energy that lit up the darkness between the stars. The weapons struck the Korthak bioships and seemed to have little effect. The organic hulls absorbed the energy blasts and actually appeared to grow stronger from the impacts. Within moments, the enemy flesh had adapted to the specific frequencies being used, and the energy weapons became almost useless. The Korthak response was swift and brutal. Streams of biological acid erupted from weapon ports along their hulls and splashed across Coalition shields. The defensive barriers held for several seconds before beginning to dissolve under the corrosive assault. When the shields failed, the acid ate through armor plating like it was soft metal. SciFi watched in horror as his carefully planned formation began to crumble. The CSS Harmony took a direct hit from one of the larger bioships, and her entire forward section simply melted away. Emergency bulkheads sealed the breach, but half the crew was already dead. The CSS Unity tried to maintain formation, but her shield generators overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. The elegant battle doctrine that had served the Coalition for centuries was proving completely useless against an enemy that fought like a living virus. The Korthak ships swarmed over individual targets in coordinated attacks that overwhelmed point defenses. Their tentacles wrapped around Coalition vessels and held them steady, while acid weapons dissolved vital systems. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than we can count," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic in his voice. "The enemy is adapting to our weapons faster than we can adjust frequencies." SciFi's skin flickered with rapid color. Changes as stress chemicals flooded his system. Everything was going wrong. The Korthak were supposed to be mindless beasts that could be defeated with superior technology and careful planning. Instead, they were fighting with an intelligence that bordered on genius. That was when something unexpected appeared on his sensors. The human ships were moving. Instead of staying in their assigned position with the evacuation convoy, they were accelerating toward the main battle. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system with that same calm confidence he had shown earlier. "Coalition Command, this is Captain Morrison aboard the UES Defiance. We're moving to assist your fleet." Zeftai felt a surge of panic that had nothing to do with his own situation. These primitive humans had no idea what they were flying into. Their crude ships would be torn apart in seconds by weapons that could dissolve advanced coalition armor. "Captain Morrison, maintain your current position. You are not equipped to engage these enemies." "Sir, with respect, we can see your ships are taking heavy damage. Our weapons might be more effective than you think." Before Zeftai could respond, the human fleet was already entering weapons range. The 12 vessels spread out in a loose formation that looked chaotic compared to the precise geometry preferred by coalition tacticians. Their movements seemed random and uncoordinated, as if each captain was making independent decisions without consulting the others. The lead Korthak bioships turned their attention to these new targets and launched streams of acid at the approaching humans. Zeftai expected to see the primitive vessels dissolve under the corrosive assault, but instead something remarkable happened. The human ships simply took the hits and kept coming. Their thick armor plating absorbed the acid without melting, and their crude construction seemed almost designed to survive exactly this kind of punishment. Then the humans opened fire, and Zeftai saw something he had never witnessed before in galactic warfare. Instead of energy beams or guided missiles, the human weapons fired solid chunks of metal at incredible velocities. The kinetic projectiles punched through Korthak bio-armor like it was wet paper and caused massive internal damage to the organic ships. The enemy had evolved to counter energy weapons and sophisticated guidance systems, but they had no defense against simple chunks of metal moving at relativistic speeds. The bioships tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. Physics was physics, and momentum was momentum. When several tons of dense metal struck a target at significant fractions of light speed, the results were always the same. Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication system again, and this time there was something different in his tone, something that made Zeftai's crystalline skin crawl with unease. "Coalition Command, the enemy is vulnerable to kinetic weapons. Recommend all ships switch to solid projectiles if available." The human captain sounded pleased. Not relieved or satisfied, but actually pleased like someone who had just discovered something enjoyable. Zeftai realized with growing horror that these humans were not afraid of the Korthak swarm. They were excited by the challenge. The human fleet tore through the Korthak formation like predators among prey, and Zeftai watched with growing amazement as everything he understood about warfare was turned upside down. Where coalition ships fought with careful precision and elegant formations, the humans attacked with brutal efficiency that seemed almost random, yet somehow worked perfectly. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Chang aboard the UES Retribution demonstrated tactics that no military academy in the galaxy taught. When her guided missiles proved ineffective against Korthak point defenses, she ordered her weapons crew to remove the guidance systems entirely and fire them as dumb projectiles. The unguided warheads flew straight through the enemy defensive grid and exploded against bioship hulls with devastating results. "All ships, strip guidance packages from remaining missiles," Morrison commanded over the fleet channel. "Fire them as kinetic rounds. These things can't adapt to stupidity." Zeftai heard something in the human captain's voice that made his crystalline spine tingle with unease. Morrison was laughing. Actually laughing while his ship traded fire with creatures that had been dissolving coalition vessels with ease just minutes before. The other human voices on the communication channels carried the same tone of excitement mixed with professional competence. The UES Vengeance found herself surrounded by 3 smaller Korthak bioships whose tentacles were trying to wrap around her hull. Captain Beth Harper responded by ordering her crew to overload their energy weapons deliberately. When the guns overheated and exploded, they created massive electromagnetic pulses that fried the nervous systems of the organic ships. The Korthak. Vessels went limp and drifted helplessly, while Harper's crew switched to backup weapons. "Nice trick, Vengeance," came Morrison's voice. "All ships, remember that one. These bugs don't like electromagnetic interference." But what truly shocked SciFi was how the human ships coordinated with each other. They had no rigid battle plan or predetermined formations, yet they moved together like a single organism. When one ship came under heavy fire, the others automatically adjusted position to provide covering fire. When ammunition ran low, ships would swap positions so that vessels with full magazines could take point. Captain Danny Clark, aboard the UES Ranger, demonstrated this fluid teamwork when his ship's main guns were damaged by acid spray. Without being ordered, he pulled back while the UES Storm moved forward to take his place in the formation. Clark's crew immediately began field repairs while his remaining weapons provided point defense for the other ships. "Coalition forces, this is Morrison," the human captain's voice crackled over the communication system. "We're going to try something. Called a firing solution Alpha. Recommend you pull back to minimum safe distance." SciFi had no idea what a firing solution Alpha meant, but he ordered his remaining ships to retreat as requested. The human fleet suddenly condensed into a tight formation, with all 12 vessels pointing their weapons at the largest Korthak, Bioship. The massive creature was easily 5 times the size of any human vessel, and its thick hide had already proven resistant to most conventional weapons. The humans opened fire simultaneously, and SciFi watched in amazement as hundreds of kinetic projectiles struck the target within seconds of each other. The bioship's armor held against the first wave but began to crack under the sustained bombardment. The second wave punched through the damaged sections and caused massive internal explosions as the projectiles struck vital organs deep inside. The creature. The giant bioship writhed in agony before going limp and beginning a slow tumble through space. Green blood leaked from dozens of wounds, and its smaller escort vessels seemed confused without the guidance of their larger companion. The humans immediately switched targets and began methodically destroying the disoriented survivors. But the most disturbing thing for SciFi was listening to the human combat chatter. These warriors talked to each other during battle with casual familiarity that suggested they actually enjoyed what they were doing. Sergeant Paul Rodriguez, manning a point defense turret, whooped with excitement as he tracked down fleeing Korthak fighters. "Come on, you ugly bugs, is that all you got?" Rodriguez called out over the communication channel. "My grandmother hits harder than that." His enthusiasm was infectious, and SciFi could hear other human crew members responding with increased efficiency and deadly precision. They were treating this life-or-death battle like some kind of competitive sport. When the UES Thunder scored a particularly impressive kill on a medium-sized bioship, her entire crew cheered like spectators at an entertainment event. Commander Chang's voice cut through the celebration with professional authority. "All right, people, let's stay focused. We've still got hostiles out there. Rodriguez, save the trash talk for after we win." "Yes, ma'am," came the sergeant's reply, though SciFi could hear the grin in his voice. The tide of battle had completely shifted. Korthak bioships that had been adapting to coalition energy weapons found themselves helpless against simple kinetic projectiles fired by ships that seemed designed specifically for this kind of brutal close-quarters combat. The organic hulls that could absorb energy and adapt to guided missiles had no answer for chunks of dense metal moving at incredible speeds. More disturbing than their effectiveness was their obvious enjoyment of the violence. These humans had not just developed effective weapons and tactics, but they seemed to have evolved specifically for warfare. Every aspect of their behavior suggested a species that found combat not just necessary, but actually pleasurable. SciFi realized he was witnessing something that the galaxy had never seen before. Not just another military force, but a race of natural-born killers who had turned the art of destruction into a form of entertainment. The crystalline commander began to understand that perhaps the coalition had not recruited allies, but rather unleashed something far more dangerous than the Korthak swarm. The battle reached its climax when the largest Korthak bioship began spawning smaller attack vessels from ports along its massive hull. The creature was like a living factory producing enemy fighters faster than the combined human and coalition fleets could destroy them. Fresh swarms of small organic ships poured into space and began coordinating attacks on the human vessels with renewed aggression. SciFi watched the tactical display with growing concern as the humans found themselves increasingly outnumbered. Their kinetic weapons were devastatingly effective against larger targets, but the smaller Korthak fighters were fast and agile enough to avoid most projectile fire. The bioships swarmed around individual human vessels like angry insects trying to sting a larger predator to death. The UES Defiance took the brunt of the assault as dozens of small Korthak fighters concentrated their acid weapons on Morrison's flagship. The ship's thick armor began to smoke and bubble under the corrosive bombardment, and several weapon turrets went offline as their mounting points dissolved. Emergency bulkheads sealed breached sections, but the damage was accumulating, faster than repair crews could handle. "Defiance is taking heavy damage," came Morrison's voice over the communication channel. His tone remained calm despite the desperate situation. "We're losing structural integrity on decks 4 through 7. Any rational commander would have ordered a retreat at that point. The mission was clearly beyond the capabilities of primitive. Human technology and preserving what remained of the fleet was the logical choice. But Morrison did something that made SciFi's crystalline blood freeze with horror. "All ships, this is Morrison. We're going to ram the factory ship. Cleary, path for us and prepare to finish off the stragglers." The alien commander felt panic surge through his nervous system. Ramming attacks were theoretical maneuvers mentioned in ancient military texts, but no civilized species had attempted such barbaric tactics in over 1,000 years. The idea of deliberately destroying your own ship to damage the enemy was considered primitive beyond belief. "Captain Morrison, you cannot sacrifice your vessel," SciFi transmitted urgently. "Retreat and regroup with the evacuation fleet." Morrison's response chilled the coalition commander to his crystalline core. "Sir, with respect, this is what my ship was built for. Defiance is a destroyer-class vessel. We destroy things." Fade, human captain said it with the same casual tone someone might use to describe their daily job. Destroying enemy ships was not a grim necessity for these creatures, but rather their primary function in life. SciFi realized that human military vessels were not just weapons platforms, but actual instruments of deliberate destruction crewed by beings who embraced that purpose. The remaining human ships moved to support Morrison's suicidal attack run. They formed a protective corridor around the damaged Defiance and poured covering fire into the swarms of Korthak fighters. The UES Retribution and UES Storm flanked the flagship, while smaller vessels provided point defense against incoming acid streams. What happened next demonstrated something that SciFi had never encountered in centuries of military service. When Morrison announced his intention to ram the enemy factory ship and gave his crew the opportunity to evacuate to other vessels, every single human aboard chose to remain at their posts. Not because they were trapped, or because escape was impossible, but because they wanted to complete the mission. "All hands, this is the captain," Morrison's voice echoed through the Defiance's communication system. "We're going to take out that factory ship, but anyone who wants to transfer to another vessel has 30 seconds to get to the escape pods." SciFi listened in amazement as the human crew responded with what could only be described as enthusiasm. Voices throughout the ship confirmed their readiness to die alongside their captain. Engineer Lisa Park reported that she had the engines running at maximum power. Weapons Officer Kevin Adams confirmed that all remaining missiles were armed for impact detonation. Navigator Susan Wright plotted the most effective collision course. These humans were not just willing to die for their mission, but they were excited about the opportunity to inflict maximum damage on their enemies in the process. The crystalline commander began to understand that he was dealing with a species that viewed death in battle not as a tragic necessity, but as the ultimate expression of their purpose. The UES Defiance accelerated toward the massive Korthak factory, ship with her remaining weapons blazing. The bio-creature tried to turn away, but it was too large and slow to avoid the incoming human vessel. Smaller Korthak fighters swarmed around the destroyer in desperate attempts to stop her, but the escort. Ships provided covering fire that cleared most of the attackers. Morrison's voice came over the communication channel one final time. Coalition Command, it has been an honor serving alongside you. Tell High Command that humanity stands ready to serve. The collision was spectacular in its violence. The UES Defiance struck the factory ship at near maximum velocity, and her reinforced prow punched deep into the organic hull before her remaining missiles detonated simultaneously. The explosion tore the massive bioship apart from the inside and sent burning debris across half the battlefield. In the aftermath of the destruction, SciFi stared at his tactical display and tried to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not just won the battle, but had done so with a level of violence and sacrifice that defied everything he understood about rational military doctrine. They had turned their own ships into weapons and their crews into willing ammunition. For the first time in his long military career, Commander SciFi experienced true fear. Not fear of losing the war or fear of the enemy, but fear of the allies fighting beside him. These humans were not just effective warriors, but beings who embraced destruction with an enthusiasm that bordered on madness. The crystalline officer began to wonder what would happen when they ran out of enemies to fight. 3 days after the battle, SciFi found himself walking through the wreckage of a human destroyer that had been towed back to Kepler Station for analysis. The ship was the UES Thunder, and she had taken massive damage during the final engagement with the Korthak swarm. Acid burns covered most of her hull, and several sections had been completely eaten away by the organic weapons. Chief Engineer Amanda Brooks guided the Coalition commander through the damaged corridors with the casual professionalism that seemed typical of her species. She pointed out various systems and explained how they had continued functioning even after sustaining what should have been catastrophic damage. The human ship was built like nothing SciFi had ever encountered. Your vessels are constructed very differently from Coalition designs, the alien officer observed, as they examined a bulkhead that had been partially dissolved, but still maintained structural integrity. This appears to be solid metal rather than composite materials. Brooks nodded and ran her hand along the scarred wall. Yes, sir. We use good old-fashioned steel and titanium alloy. It's heavier and less efficient than your fancy materials, but it keeps working even when everything goes to hell. The crystalline commander studied the construction with growing unease. Where Coalition ships were marvels of engineering efficiency designed to maximize performance, the human vessels seemed built with the assumption that they would be damaged severely and need to keep fighting. Every corridor was reinforced, like a defensive position, and backup systems had backup systems. Chief Brooks, how long did your people spend developing these designs? SciFi asked carefully. The human engineer looked puzzled by the question. Sir, we've been building warships for about 4,000 years. These are just the latest models based on lessons learned from previous conflicts. 4,000 years of continuous military development, while most Coalition species had abandoned warfare within centuries of achieving spaceflight. SciFi realized that humanity had spent their entire technological development period focused on creating better ways to destroy their enemies. Their ships were not transportation vehicles with weapons attached, but rather weapons with just enough life support to keep the crew alive. They continued through the damaged sections, and Brooks showed him how the human crew had adapted to combat conditions in real time. When the main weapons control center was destroyed by acid spray, the crew had rigged manual firing solutions from the backup navigation station. When the primary communication array was damaged, they had strung emergency cables through maintenance shafts to maintain contact with other ships. "Your people seem very adaptable under pressure," Zeftai commented as they examined a section where the crew had literally welded armor plates over a hull breach while under fire. Brooks smiled with what looked like pride. "That's what we do, sir. When something breaks, we fix it or find another way to make it work. The mission always comes first. The mission always comes first." The words echoed in Zeftai's mind as they reviewed the casualty reports from the battle. The coalition had lost 40% of their fleet and 60% of their personnel. Those numbers represented a military disaster that would require months to recover from and would likely result in several commanders being relieved of duty. The humans had lost 30% of their ships, but only 10% of their crews. They had planned for catastrophic damage from the beginning and designed their vessels to keep as many people alive as possible, even when the ship itself was destroyed. Their damage control procedures and escape systems were more advanced than anything the coalition used. "Chief Brooks, may I ask you something about human military philosophy?" Zeftai said as they reached the Thunder's main engineering section. "Of course, sir. Fire away." "Your people seem to approach warfare differently from other species. Most civilizations view military conflict as an unfortunate necessity that should be avoided when possible. Humans appear to embrace it." Brooks considered the question seriously before responding. "Sir, I think the difference is that we never really stopped fighting. Even after we developed space travel and joined the galactic community, we kept preparing for the next war because we knew there would always be a next war." The human engineer explained that their planet had never experienced extended periods of peace. Different groups were always competing for resources or territory or ideology, and that competition frequently turned violent. They had developed their entire civilization around the assumption that conflict was the natural state of existence and peace was just a temporary pause between wars. "Most species develop technology to make life easier," Brooks continued. "We develop technology to make war more efficient. Better weapons, better armor, better ways to keep fighting even when everything goes wrong." Zeftai felt his stress hormones surge as the implications became clear. Humanity had not stumbled into military effectiveness by accident, but had deliberately evolved their entire culture around the concept of professional violence. They had turned warfare into a science and their soldiers into willing participants. In organized destruction, "Chief Brooks, what happens when you run out of external enemies to fight?" the coalition commander asked with growing dread. The human engineer looked genuinely confused by the question. "Sir, that's never been a problem before. There's always someone who needs fighting, and we're usually pretty good at finding them." As they completed their tour of the damaged ship, Zeftai realized that the coalition had not recruited military allies, but had instead unleashed apex predators into galactic society. These humans were not content to simply defend themselves, but actively sought out opportunities for combat. They had turned destruction into an art form, and their crews competed with each other to achieve the most impressive kills. The crystalline officer reviewed the communication logs from the battle and found dozens of examples of human crews celebrating successful attacks with the enthusiasm of athletes winning competitions. They kept score of enemy ships destroyed and traded techniques for maximizing damage like other species might share cooking recipes. When he returned to his quarters that night, Zeftai sat before his personal terminal and began composing a report to Coalition High Command. The words came slowly as he tried to explain what he had learned about their newest allies. These humans were effective warriors, certainly, but they were also something far more dangerous. They were a species that had evolved specifically for warfare and found genuine pleasure in the act of destruction. 2 months after the battle with the Korthak swarm, Zeftai found himself sitting in the observation lounge of Kepler Station, sharing a drink with Colonel Danny Wright of the Human Ground Forces. The human officer had arrived with reinforcements and was now overseeing the establishment of permanent military bases throughout the sector. The conversation had started with routine military planning, but had gradually shifted to more philosophical topics. Wright sipped his beer and gestured toward the stars visible through the transparent aluminum windows. You know, Commander, most people think humans are naturally violent, but that's not really accurate. We're naturally competitive, and competition sometimes leads to violence when the stakes are high enough. SciFi studied the human colonel with his compound eyes and tried to understand what made these creatures so different from every other species in the galaxy. Wright appeared relaxed and friendly, but there was something in his posture that suggested constant readiness for action. Even while drinking and chatting casually, he remained alert to his surroundings. Colonel Wright, I have been studying human military history since our recent engagement. Your species has been in a state of almost continuous warfare for thousands of years. How did you develop civilization under such conditions? Wright laughed and took another drink. That's the thing, Commander. We didn't develop civilization to escape warfare. We developed civilization to become better at it. Better organization, better logistics, better weapons, better training. Every major advance in human technology can be traced back to military applications. The human officer explained how his people had turned conflict into a science. They studied the methods of successful warriors and turned those lessons into doctrine that could be taught to others. They built institutions dedicated to the preservation and advancement of military knowledge. War colleges and training academies became the foundation of their educational system. Take this station, for example, Wright continued, gesturing around them. You built it as a trading post and diplomatic center. If humans had built it, we would have designed it as a fortress first and worried about commerce later. That's just how we think. SciFi realized that this casual conversation was revealing more about human nature than all his official briefings and technical manuals. These beings did not view violence as a regrettable necessity, but as the fundamental organizing principle of existence. Everything else was secondary to their ability to fight and win. Colonel, what concerns me is what happens when humanity runs out of external threats. Your people seem to require conflict to function properly. Wright nodded thoughtfully. You're not wrong, Commander. We do tend to fight among ourselves when there's nobody else around. But joining the galactic community has given us access to threats we never imagined. The Korthak were just the beginning. The human colonel pulled up a tactical display on his portable terminal and showed SciFi intelligence reports about other hostile species beyond Coalition space. Pirates and raiders who preyed on peaceful civilizations. Aggressive empires that had rejected diplomatic contact, ancient automated weapon systems left behind by extinct races. The galaxy was full of dangers that required military solutions. The way I see it, Commander, the Coalition needed a species that specializes in violence, and we needed worthy opponents. It's a perfect partnership. As Wright spoke, SciFi began to understand the true scope of what the Coalition had unleashed. These humans were not content to simply defend their territory, but were actively seeking out new conflicts to engage in. They viewed the galaxy as a vast hunting ground full of challenges to be overcome through superior firepower and tactical skill. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the command center. Long-range sensors had detected another Korthak fleet approaching from the outer rim. This group was larger than the previous swarm and was heading directly for the core systems. Coalition Command was requesting immediate military response from all available forces. Wright drained his beer and stood up with obvious excitement. Well, Commander, looks like we're back in business. My people have been getting restless with all this peace and quiet. SciFi watched the human colonel hurry toward the command center and felt that familiar chill of fear run through his crystalline nervous system. Wright was not concerned about the approaching enemy fleet, but was actually pleased by the opportunity for more combat. The humans had spent the past 2 months analyzing their previous engagement and developing new tactics specifically designed to counter Korthak bioships. When the alien commander reached the tactical center, he found the human officers already coordinating their response with deadly efficiency. Captain Kelly Nash had replaced Morrison as fleet commander and was studying the sensor readings with the same enthusiastic grin her predecessor had worn. The loss of their previous flagship and crew had not dampened their spirits, but had instead motivated them to seek revenge. Coalition Command, this is Captain Nash aboard the UES Retribution. Human fleet is ready for immediate deployment. We've got some new tricks we want to try out on these bugs. SciFi realized that the humans had not learned caution from their losses, but had instead become more dangerous. They had analyzed every aspect of the previous battle and developed improvements to their weapons and tactics. The approaching Korthak fleet would face an enemy that was better prepared and more motivated than before. As he watched the human fleet prepare for departure, the coalition commander finally understood what he was dealing with. These creatures were not just effective warriors, but apex predators who had evolved specifically to hunt and kill other intelligent species. They had turned violence into an art form and found genuine pleasure in the destruction of their enemies. The most disturbing realization was that humanity was just getting started. They had thousands of years of military experience to draw upon, and were rapidly adapting galactic technology to serve their violent purposes. The Korthak swarm was merely the first test of their capabilities, and they had passed with flying colors. SciFi sat down at his command station and began composing his final report to Coalition High Command. The words came slowly as he tried to find a way to explain what the galaxy had gained and what it might have lost. The humans were perfect allies against external threats, but they were also the most dangerous species anyone had ever encountered. His final entry read simply, personal. Note, recommend immediate review of coalition membership protocols. We did not recruit allies. We recruited apex predators, and they are on our side. For now. Outside the station windows, the human fleet departed for their second engagement with the Korthak swarm. SciFi watched them go and wondered what the galaxy would look like when these creatures finally ran out of enemies to fight.